All right. So thank you for joining me this evening for the last workshop in this accelerated series. So I have recorded this series. So for those who prefer to listen to the presentation offline, you can do so. And I'll be posting this to the YouTube channel. I'd like to briefly introduce myself before beginning. My name is Sally Xu. I am an actuary by background, and I work as SOA staff fellow for international development in Canada. I joined SOA last year, and prior to that, I work in the life and health reinsurance and insurance plus consulting industries for the last 15 years. Currently, in my role, my work is largely focused on student engagement. So part of it is coming on campus to run campus outreach events. So you'll be able to meet me in person when I come to university for campus events. So hope to see some of you there. So let's go ahead and get started. So today's workshop, we're focusing on how to write a strong, effective actuarial memo. And in my opinion, this is a really essential skill that every actuary and actuarial student should master fairly early in your career. And if you are going to complete the final project for the accelerated workshop, this will come in handy too in preparing to write that final memo. So in this presentation, we'll discuss why memos are crucial for our daily work, the key elements that make a memo a good one, and how to write memos that are not only professional, but also impactful. We'll go over some do's and don'ts related to tone and styles, and I'll present some examples that we can look at together and critique the different elements. And at the end of the session, hopefully you'll gain a stronger sense of how to communicate better in a clear, concise, and actionable way when you write the next memo. So first off, why do we even write memos, and what kind of information does a memo convey? So memo captures the detail of an actual analysis that you've conducted. It includes methods and assumption and provides recommendation based on those findings. And these recommendations are used to support informed business decisions and effective risk management. So actual memos, like I said, present the results, and they really help the decision makers understand the risks, opportunities in terms of the behind the scenes, when it comes to pricing, reserving, and investment strategies, just to name a few things. They make sure that when you're communicating with both internal parties, such as senior management and other departments like accounting, underwriting that you might interact with on a frequent basis, as well as external stakeholders like regulators and auditors, you're able to translate technical details into understandable insights for those people. And we often have to deal with compliance regulations. So memos can document the actual work that meets those regulatory and professional standards, and to make sure that we remain compliant with legal and financial reporting requirements. And internally, actual memos can help share the knowledge within your team or company, and it makes it easier for others to understand, your analysis and methods. All right, so let's go over some typical components of a good memo. First is pretty straightforward. You have the header or subject line. This helps to orient your readers quickly. Then you have the executive summary. Executive summary should be really short, a couple of paragraphs, but definitely no more than a page in length. It should be standalone and tells a complete story. So say if your audience has not read the rest of the memo, will they grasp what this memo is trying to convey? If the answer is no, then you haven't done a good job writing that executive summary. You'll have to, some key takeaways in plain language. It's like, this is what I did, this is what I found, and why it matters. And you want to start the executive summary before you actually finish writing the whole memo, and sort of, start the outline early and continue to work on it throughout. Now, the next section is the background. So the background, as the name suggests, it helps to set the stage of the analysis that you're trying to perform. It provides the purpose as well as the scope of the project. It could list any notable data sources, but you don't want to keep that part really brief. Then we have the methodology and assumptions. So what kind of methods did you use? What are some key formulas or logic that's relevant in your analysis? Have you performed any adjustments in the data, or are there data limitations that are caveats to your study? And be clear about what inputs you've used and why they're reasonable. And results. So present your findings clearly. You may use key charts or tables, but really only include the most relevant ones. And keep the explanations very concise, and don't overuse any raw data. Analysis. Analysis, I really think this is like the meat of the memo. This is the most important section in which you explain to your audience what your results actually mean. For example, what trends or insights have you seen emerge from your project? What are some findings? Are they expected or are they unexpected? And if unexpected, what are some potential causes? And based on what you have seen in the results and your interpretation, you want to end this with conclusion recommendations. So these are next steps or implications. For example, what should you do as a result of the findings you've seen? Are future investigation warranted? What should you do with the current assumptions? Should they be updated, or do you want to have more data points and then observe through maybe another period of time before deciding what to do? And lastly, this section could be optional, is the appendix. So any more like very detailed data table, or if you have code snippets that you think are important to share, you can put it there. And if you do have a few technical terms that are not necessarily commonly known, you want to define them fully here so the audience can go back and check, what the terms may mean. So let's talk about some tips for good, clear, concise writing. So first, the do's. Some of these I would say are pretty obvious, but I really want to put them here as a reminder and just really stress on those important things. Be clear, be concise, and objective. So aim for precision here. You want to say exactly what needs to be said. No more, no less. And in terms of writing, you want to avoid filler words or really like big and flowery words. Your readers are, a lot of them are technical, or even the non-technical ones, they really just want to understand your conclusions quickly without having to read through a lot of repetitive language. You need to know your target audience. So they can be very technical people, for example, other actuaries in your organization, or it could be non-technical, for example, like senior management. Who you're writing to is very important to consider. For example, if you're writing to the chief risk officer, you might want to highlight implications on capital or risk exposure. If it's going to like a less technical audience, like for example, human resources, you might want to emphasize, the benefits and the impact, and you want to focus more on communicating and the clarity over more detailed calculation, things that they might not understand. So doing so doesn't mean that you have to change any facts, but rather you really want to think about how you want to present the information that you already have. You need to decide, for example, how much background to include, how technical your language can be to suit their level of understanding, and also what information or summary would be the most useful to the audience. So, you wanna be really consistent with your terminology and language. For example, if you have something that you call a base table in one section, you don't want to call it standard table in another section, just because, if you switch a term back and forth, it just might be confusing. Pick one term and really just stick with it. This builds clarity in the long run, avoids any confusion. So audience know that you're talking about the same thing and not different things. The next point is also very obvious, I think. Use bullet points where you think is appropriate. So why use bullet points? I think really bullet points are shorter. They're not necessarily in complete sentence, but they can be very effective in improving your readability of your report. They help the readers who may not want to read every single word in detail, but help them do like a very quick scan and be able to understand and absorb your content more efficiently. And you really want to use only the very relevant charts, and you need to label them clearly. So don't put random charts on there that doesn't really convey a clear message, or it's a supplementary chart. So put the main ones that support your argument. And every chart obviously should have a clear title, access labels, and also would be really helpful if you have an explanation on what this chart or table shows and why it matters. And lastly, this is sort of my personal preference, but also good advice for writing a good memo is use active voice whenever possible. So active voice can make your writing more direct and dynamic. It stresses more on responsibility and make what you're writing easier to follow. A little bit more on that in the next slide, so I won't get into too much here. So let's talk about some common pitfalls in terms of writing. So number one, over explaining basic stats or technical steps. So you want to assume some reasonable level of background knowledge so that your audience doesn't really need to know every single little thing, right? For example, you don't need to explain how you use the lookup function or what a certain ratio mean if that's not super relevant. Save those details for where things matter. Now, on the flip side is not explaining the key insights. So your value in this memo really lies in the interpretation. So what do the numbers say and why does it matter? So you really want to get down to the most important parts. Missing context for non-technical readers. So if your primary audience is technical, even so, there still might be reviewers from other business areas who might not understand or be familiar with your project at all. So you want to spend a little bit of time explaining what a metric represents or why this assumption was chosen, adding those contexts where you think it's needed. And sometimes some of it can be done in appendix, but maybe you want to introduce certain things early on so that it doesn't get confusing for the readers. And lastly is use of too many technical jargons. So you don't want to write a ton of acronyms or very advanced terms that people may not generally know, because this way, sometimes you may just lose a good part of your readership or confuse them. So when you do deem jargons are necessary, you want to explain them simply and plainly at least once in the beginning, and then continue using, like I said earlier, similar jargons or the same jargon rather throughout your memo. So it is clear what you're trying to achieve. So back to active versus passive voice. I already mentioned, active voice is preferred because it identifies who did the work and it helps to remove any ambiguity. So this is important in professional communication where accountability is important, right? So it communicates using active voice. It communicates in fewer words, and it is easier to understand for most. And your writing can sound more confident and authoritative that way. So to share a few different types of active voice, first you can have the third person. For example, the actuarial team reviewed. You can use neutral or objective language like the observed results indicate. You can use action now, review of the data support. Instead of saying it was reviewed by such and such, the data was supported by this and that, right? So a very quick example to demonstrate what I mean by that. So the example here is using a passive voice. I'm just going to read it out loud. Mortality experience from 2019 to 2024 was analyzed and results supported updating the assumption. So instead of writing that, it is more easier to follow and sounds more stronger and more in command if you wrote, we analyzed the mortality experience from 2019 to 2024. The results supported updating the assumption. If you think that using we is less appropriate in this scenario, you could say instead, analysis of experience from 2019 to 2024 supports a change in assumption. So either way, both ones sound better and more confident and still convey the same message that you're trying to say. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple of examples. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to read this first example before we kind of talk about what could be better. So we'll just read it out here. The data was analyzed over a few years, and the numbers went down a bit over time, but the movement wasn't consistent. It's hard to say exactly what's happening, but there may be some kind of a trend. This could mean that we might have to change assumption, but we're not totally sure yet. So again, like this one is sort of over exaggerated a little bit. You probably can tell right away that it's not very good. So why is it not good? So first of all, the language sounds vague. It sounds like, a couple of sentences to say the same thing. It doesn't really tell us what to do. And, things like we're not sure what exactly is happening. There's some sort of trend. So this doesn't really inspire any confidence, right? Like it sounds to other people that you, as a person writing, don't really know what you're talking about. And also, it doesn't provide any actual numbers to back up the trend. So the people reading it, they're confused, they're uncertain, you don't know what the next steps are. So here is an improved version. Now let's compare them together. Why is the improved version better? So looking at this, it carries a sharper tone. It sounds more professional. And really the biggest difference is including hard evidence in there, right? So you saw, mortality rate for male age 65 to 74 declined by an average of 2.1% annually from 2019 to 2013. So this noted the actual trend that's happening. And then it said, there is stronger language to say that it's consistent and statistically significant trend. More importantly, this improved version gives you a recommendation. Given the sustained improvement, we recommend updating the mortality assumption to reflect lower expected rates in the future projection. So this is just a snippet of like a section of a memo, right? So following this, you can have a data table to show the actual, a little bit more detail and also provide the actual recommendation. So it just says updating mortality assumption, but it doesn't say what it should update to, right? So you will further support that with another data table to summarize what your recommendations are. So, so really, really quick recap of the original versus the improved. What's better? So you use specific numbers instead of very vague language indicating, that things kind of went downward trend. It wasn't good. It was given a clear time frame, and it talked about, a specific population like male age 65 to 74. It uses a stronger and more confident tone. There is a concrete recommendation at the end. So these are all the elements to what a good memo should include. So let's take a look at another example. So this is actually like a super, super quick memo. So no memo, I think in reality will be this short, but kind of put this one together to demonstrate some good points here. And also further, besides what is done okay, what can be better, right, to make it much more stronger. So let's just analyze it piece by piece here. So first we'll start with the subject line. So subject line is titled Analysis of the 2024 Reserve Requirement. So what's good about it? Well, it's pretty straightforward, right? It kind of tells you this is about the 2024 reserve requirements. Now let's talk about what could be better. So it's descriptive, but it doesn't really convey anything like a change or potentially, the urgency or what's needed to do. So what you could do instead is you can summarize the decision and recommendation by saying recommendation to revise the 2024 reserve requirement. So it shows that you are recommending changing the requirements. Okay, the second section, the introduction. So it just says we completed it. It was found that reserves were higher than expected. Then I suggest considering revising the reserve requirement to avoid overcapitalization. So what's good about it is, it talks about what kind of is happening in this memo, but it jumps straight in there without saying why this matters to management. So it doesn't provide enough of the background per se. So what you want to do is you want to more talking about, well, what is this memo about? Why now? Like, what really triggered this movement, and what decision and action is needed? So you want to answer a few of those questions in this section. Next, we have the key findings. So key finding is that reserve have increased 5% over last year. A change in mortality assumption led to a higher than expected increase in reserves. The current reserve methodology doesn't fully reflect the new market condition, resulting in conservative estimates. So what's good? Well, it lists the drivers of the reserve increase, which is good. You definitely want to do that in your key findings. But what could be better? So currently, as they stand, the findings are pretty general and they lack more quantitative detail or context. For example, when you say reserve increased by 5%, but what is the dollar amount? That's the impact, right? Because 5% could represent a million, it could be 10 million, it could be 100 million, right? Depending on the size. So without having that detail, you don't really know how material it is. How much should I care about 5%? Maybe this block is so small that 5% doesn't matter, or it could be our biggest block of business that you want to, state it. So to summarize, you always want to support findings with numbers, trend, and also any comparison to any benchmark or expectation. That usually is very helpful. And if you have any tables or visuals that you could display here to convey a stronger message, definitely this is a place that you could use it. Next section, we have the recommendation. So it would be prudent to adjust the reserve slightly downward to align with current market trends. A more flexible methodology should also be considered going forward. So what's good? It provides a clear direction. So, it says adjust reserve downward. But how can we make it better? So the recommendation here is a little bit vague. It doesn't really say how much to adjust it or what the impact would be in terms of financial statements, especially if your company reports on different financial bases, there could be different impact. For example, when you do IR 17, or if your company reports in US GAAP as well, it could be very different impacts on different financial reporting bases. And also in terms of any risk measures or compliant, for example, regulatory ratios, capital ratios, that kind of thing. So it would be really good to list all those impact too, because for different purposes, different people look at the impact on certain measures or ratios, and that could be indicative to them that is this a problem or is this something that we don't really have to worry about. So to summarize the section, when you have recommendation, they should be specific, actionable, and supported by decision. So what's a good example? You could say, we recommend reducing the reserve by 3%, which is equal to $10 million. And it is certainly material to our block of business. And this is recommended to align with the updated mortality assumption. And this will result in an increase of 2% in solvency ratios, bringing it from 123% to 125%. So then whatever else, metric that you think your analysis would need, you would probably add it here for different audiences. Now, the last section here is the conclusion. This analysis shows that current reserve levels are above what's required. We recommend reviewing the methodology used and adjusting the reserve accordingly. Let me know if you have any questions. So what's good about it? This one, it conveys, everything that you need to do. But what could be better is that, you also list the recommendations here, and you would outline next steps as well. So it doesn't really give you any more additional information. So it doesn't really wrap up this memo well, if you will. So we looked at all the components of the memo. We looked at different styles of writing and what are some do's and don'ts in order to have good, clear, concise writing. We specifically talked about active versus passive voice and why active voice is the preferred version. We walked through a couple of quick examples. So this kind of brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope it provided you with some good information in writing, whether for this final project for our accelerated series or going forward if you're doing something for school, for a co-op term. Just remember those key points. I can definitely share this presentation with you guys after the meeting, and a recording will also be available. So I'll just pause here to see if anyone has any questions at all for me. Go ahead.
Hi. I do have a question. So
yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was very clear and it was helpful. But also, given that we're working on synthetic data and we're not really working towards making any recommendations, how does how do we use the new insights you gave us to help writing the memo assessment for this project?
Okay, so you're talking about specific this project. So I want to say that when you say synthetic data, I just want to actually clarify that by saying that it's actually based on a real study that the SOA has done. But we did put certain information kind of to mask it a little bit. So you could really treat this as a real life example. It's just that we changed a little bit on like the birthday, so we don't want any like personal identifiable information, so that for privacy reasons. But really, it is a complete set of data that's based on real life, but adjusting a tiny bit so you can just kind of pretend that it is real data. And second of all, when we do experience study, and I'll just speak from experience study on a high level, you don't know whether things will be different than your current assumption, right? And the reason why we do experience study on whether it's on a 3-year cycle or sometimes could be on an annual cycle, if in the block of the business is material, it could, there could be large changes in the trends. You don't know what's going to happen. So sometimes when you do experience study, when there are small movements or statistically insignificant, movements, the recommendation is to keep the current assumption due to, whatever, you analyze by age group and you look at this factor and that factor, and you deem that there is not much movement, right? Or there is not enough data to support change. So your recommendation, even though it is a recommendation to say that you should keep the current assumption, still is a recommendation in itself. I hope this helped to answer your question, that you basically have to do this work even if nothing really has changed and you're keeping it. But if you're changing it because you notice certain trends and data, then you want to clearly state why, your data and what you have seen, the insights support changing certain assumptions and for which groups specifically, and back it up using data tables. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And in the future, this applies beyond just experience studies. If you're doing some capital analysis, right? Like I'll give an example of something that a long time ago I worked in the past. Every time if you are sending capital in between the parent company or the child company, there's capital implications, right? So you want to determine what is the most efficient level of capital to keep so that it can fulfill your regulatory requirements, right? Because OSFI, which is our financial regulator in Canada, it states that you need to hold X amount of capital, right? But holding excess capital, or what we call lazy capital, is inefficient for your business operation because you're putting there that could be invested or in other business, or something that could be used more efficiently, right? So it is a fine balance between having enough capital so you satisfy regulatory requirements. At the same time, you're not keeping too much there. So there's these behind the scene analysis on how much is appropriate, just to give you different ideas of things that you can analyze and recommend on. And a memo, think about is it's a way to support your argument, right? You think it should be changed or unchanged, and these are the reasons why. And I'm giving you very clear evidence to support this. And avoid, like I said, avoid really like stating the same thing, stating too many of the same things in different sentences. So you want to think about your audience. You put yourself in their shoes. What do they need to hear? And this is the bare minimum they need to know without giving out too much more that they don't really care about. So at the end of the day, I think a lot of people don't realize how important memos are. Like, you can be super smart, you can be doing modeling, you can be doing these analysis, you can figure out the answer. But if you aren't able to communicate what your findings are in a very clear, concise form that people can understand, then your value of putting together the analysis, it almost diminishes to nothing, right? So really important to be able to be comfortable in writing memo and master it early on in your career. And this will boast well when you're looking for like the next promotion, right? Because a lot of these documents potentially can go quite a few levels up, to management level. And if your name gets attached on this memo, it will really boast well for your own professional development. Anything else that anybody wants to say or ask? Okay, I'll take the silence as always good. So like I promised, I will share the presentation. I'll also post this video recording on YouTube. And if you have anything else to ask me, whether it's memo writing or anything else, given my role is really focused on student engagement within the SOA in Canada, I really welcome your connection and welcome you to ask me questions and just have a conversation and whatever you need to know and you want to ask me about my career or the career pathways generally in Canada or about SOA exam systems. I'm really happy to be able to connect with you or help you connect to a person who can answer your question. You can search me up. My name is Sally Shu on LinkedIn. You can email me at my SOA email address. It's sxu@soa.org.